Hello, everyone, and welcome back to CLI's Legal Gen AI Conversations series. In this series, we're discussing how generative AI is impacting the legal ecosystem way beyond the tech. In each session, we're tackling one area of legal business or practice that's been impacted by Gen AI, and we're asking legal thought leaders and doers all around the world how they're managing the unforeseen, the challenges, and the opportunities, and what they've learned along the way. And that brings me to this episode. There's no doubt that AI, and particularly generative AI, has disrupted legal practice in a way and at a pace that we've never seen before. It's pervasive, it's impacting every aspect of legal work, and it's unrelenting. It's exhausting, we might even say. It's making us reimagine, redefine, reinvent the tech-human interface in a way that even 3 years ago, and sometimes I think even 3 days ago, we would not have expected. So where does the line get drawn between the tech and the human bits in the delivery of legal services? Is there a line? Have we actually been heading to this crossroad for a while now, independent of Gen AI? Can we? Should we? Will we see the Lawyerless law firm in 2030? We're going to discuss that and a whole lot more today with the help of our amazing panelists. And let me introduce you to them now. Miriam Rahani, Head of Transformation and Legal Ops, OGC, PwC Australia. Hi, Miriam. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Laura Vickers, Founding Director of Nest Legal. Hi, Laura. And Dominic Woolrick, CEO and co-founder of LawPath. Hi, Dom. Good to see you as well. Welcome, everyone. I should say welcome back, everyone. It's wonderful to see you back in this session. I want to kick us off, just dive straight into it. But firstly, want to do that by getting a little bit about your background. So tell us about you and particularly what you do and how what you do connects the law to legal tech. And Miriam, you're going to kick us off with that one, please.
Thanks, Terry. So I work with the in-house team at PwC Australia as Head of Transformation and Legal Operations. My background is as a practicing lawyer for 10 years, and then I've worked in the legal ops space for the last 10 years. I work a lot of what I do is looking at how technology can be leveraged to better deliver legal services and better support our legal teams. And at the moment, I work a lot with how we engage with our external law firms. And so part of that is grappling with where we would love to see technology, including AI, leveraged to bring greater efficiency and bring down the cost of the legal services that we're buying, and getting our heads around how we should be doing that. What we need to be aware of. We're really at the early stages of that. So really looking forward to this discussion with Laura and Dom today.
Yeah, fantastic. So Laura, tell us about you and the Nesties. We're going to give Nestie a nickname, right?
So the Nestie, I'm the original Nestie. I started Nest 11 years ago with a vision to create a law firm that really helped busy families and helped them get the legal services they otherwise wouldn't get. So it really started with that workflow and designing it for the experience of the busy family. And then tech was inserted into that workflow where it would make it easier, more accessible, more affordable, and more suited to the clients I wanted to be acting for. And now there's 23 Nesties based across Australia and New Zealand. And in our next phase, we're really focusing on being tech powered, but because we're competing with Dom and his ilk, human forward as well.
But we're friendly today.
We are friendly today.
Right, yeah, yes. Yeah. So Dom, tell us about, can we say the LawPathies? It doesn't seem to really work, but we'll go with it.
Yeah, we've always tried to find a nickname for our team and we've never really cracked it. So if anyone's got a good idea, hit me up. So my name's Dom, co-founder and CEO of LawPath. LawPath is a legal and compliance software platform that empowers small businesses to really complete legal tasks themselves. We've gone on a bit of a journey for 10 years now, since we started thinking that we would replace lawyers altogether. We would build software that could completely replace a lawyer. went through a lot of iterations where we realized, luckily for a lot of people on the call, hopefully, that lawyers aren't replaceable, and they do need to be involved in somewhere along the journey of the delivery of legal services, and have really landed at a hybrid model where we use software and humans to provide legal solutions specifically to SMBs. And then with AI and the real growth over the last probably 2.5 years, that's had a big impact on our business, because theoretically a lot of what we wanted to do early was kind of theoretically possible, practically not possible. But given access to models and all the new software that's been coming out recently, we've been able to turbocharge some of the things we do here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everyone for that intro. Dom, I'm going to stay with you for this next question, and it's in the title. In other words, how close are we really to the Lawyerless law firm? And I'm thinking there more about a feasibility and a readiness piece, but it's kind of somewhat become even more topical with the news out of the UK today that the regulatory authorities there have looked favourably on what's being termed a new AI law firm, Garfield AI, that's working in the debt claims area, and we can talk a little bit about that as well. But I'm wondering if you could tell us or give us your thoughts on this from a lot of different perspectives. So, how close are we in terms of the technology? Culturally, I think, is another really important one. Commercially is another really important one. And what's still standing in the way, if you like, of whether or not the Lawyerless law firm can actually happen? So a big question, Dom, but it goes to the heart of what we're talking about today, I think.
Yeah, well, let's kind of cover them off over in those four headlines. So,
yeah,
starting with what I actually see the slowest moving, although given the news out of the UK this morning, maybe things are changing, which is the regulatory environment, which is really, we're based in Australia. That you can't practice legal services without being a human under the regulatory framework in Australia. And so that's probably the biggest, one of the largest limitations, which is unless we see a change in that regulatory framework, there will still need to be a human or a lawyer involved in the process at some point. And, we can unbundle the process as much as possible and just have the lawyer injected at the critical time. But given the rules right now, there still will need to be a lawyer somewhere in that law firm, typically at the end, putting their name against it. So I think that's probably the first part. But we can still get a long way towards the Lawyerless law firm because, as I mentioned before, unbundling these workflows that clients go through, there's so much that can be done by a non-lawyer. And I think that's what a lot of the software businesses, and to be honest, law firms have been doing this for a long time, right? When we look under the hood, it's paralegals, it's, non-AI software, like we have been unbundling for a long time. So that's one of the first barriers from a regulatory perspective. Culturally, we're seeing a huge shift. I'm not sure if anyone read Lawyers Weekly yesterday, but there was an article that said, when clients were given AI-generated advice and lawyer-generated advice and not told who wrote the advice, they actually preferred the AI-generated advice, which I thought was very interesting. As lawyers, we obviously see all the red flags behind that, but we deal with small businesses every day, and to be honest, they don't care who wrote the advice. They just need the solution. And they are so used to now going to other software in other industries and having the confidence that it's correct. I do see a world very, very soon where it'll just be implied that anything that comes out of the legal space, whether software generated or human generated, is just implied to be correct. And so we're pretty close there, I think, in terms of people being happy and confident to receive advice from something other than a human. Probably the last one let's touch on is technology. We're not there yet. But we are definitely going to get there. I mean, I think, a lot of our business comes from contract drafting. And for a long time, we were like, the AI is great, but it needs to be a co-pilot for a lawyer. I've definitely changed my tune over the last year, watching how quickly these models are evolving. In 2 years' time, we will get to a point where the models can draft perfect legal documents.
Yeah.
What's going to happen there, though, is I believe you're still going to need that oversight from a professional to catch those edge cases or to catch those things you didn't really see. So yeah, technology-wise, we're not there yet. There's still hallucinations. Whenever we draft internally using AI, we are still getting it checked by a human most of the time because we're just not 100% confident. But that will, I would say, another 2 years be gone, and you will find that as long as the right inputs are there, the drafting especially will come out perfect. So I suppose my kind of summary on all these points is that we are so much closer to technology-driven law firms or even lawyerless law firms than we were 2 years ago. But I still see it being another couple of years before we would end up with something where there are no lawyers. We might get to this down the track, but there's always going to be lawyers involved in this process at some point. It's just how involved. And then it also kind of, just to finish up, it depends on the type of work as well. So we just saw Garfield, they're doing cease and desist and debt collection, super commoditized, lends itself totally to software. If we're doing family law and where we're dealing with complex issues and people, let's not use AI right now.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dom. Laura, I want to come to you next on this, but just picking up on the point that Dom just made, I'm going to just inject another little piece into this, which is there was a Harvard Business Review article last month that compared how people use GenAI between 2024 and 2025. In 2024, the top ones was basically around technical stuff. Really interestingly, in 2025, that's shifted to emotional stuff. And so the reason that I'm kind of prefacing going to you with that is you're working in an area, as Dom's, mentioned, where it's highly personal. But we've got now at least one piece of information saying that, well, actually people are going to AI for that stuff too. So the same question to you, wrapped with that little additional bit, how close are we to a lawyerless law firm?
So I think it comes down to the role of the lawyer, right? And circling back to something that Dom said about it's as long as the right inputs are there, then you only need the lawyer at the end. And I think that's the piece where lawyers still need to be there because the inputs aren't usually right. Clients aren't typically asking the correct question. Maybe they are with the debt collection letter, maybe they are with the cease and desist. But often the thing that they come to a lawyer for is not the thing that they leave with, or that they realize there's extra things that's needed. And it's not necessarily replicated in the document because we are more than document drafters.
Yes.
So if someone walks in saying, I'm lending my husband 50 grand to start his business, draft me a loan agreement. The technology could draft a loan agreement. ChatGPT could draft a loan agreement. Is the family court going to respect a loan agreement between a husband and a wife? No. So it's about that lawyer coming in and having that conversation. And yes, it can do the emotions. It can say, let me coach you through a conversation with your husband about why you're not going to lend him $50,000. But it's telling you what you want to hear, whereas lawyers are often telling you what you don't want to hear. I was walking to the office this morning and I said to ChatGPT, okay, you pretend to be Terry and you ask me questions.
Oh, heaven forbid.
And it kept saying, Laura, you're great. They are wonderful answers. I'm like, ChatGPT, that's not helping. I need you to be critical. That was not a wonderful answer. And I think it's degrading what lawyers do if you think that we're just hype girls. We're not. Yeah. We're more than that.
And there's human and replicated human, and they are not the same for a bunch of different reasons that we've been highlighting. Fabulous. Miriam, let me round out this question with you. And I guess you're looking at this across a whole bunch of different clients as well. And so how are you kind of seeing this play out, the lawyerless law firm?
I think it comes back again to Laura's point about what is the service of what is the delivery of legal services, what is the provision of legal services, and at what point is it sort of providing information, and what point is it that exercising that judgment. And I think that absolutely, this is the way we're going. And I really don't think we're there yet. But I think, and I know that we'll talk about guardrails in a moment, but I think this is just an extension of where we were sort of already going, and that ability for people to self-help and maybe select the different way that they want to receive something, like, downloading a template for an agreement, and knowing that they're sort of putting themselves in the shoes of a lawyer, so to speak, and having to think about how the specifics of their situation might apply to that, and whether that's completely appropriate for them. So I think that, yes, we will have lawyerless law firms, but it will be within very limited parameters, such as what you spoke about this morning with Garfield AI, really around that heavily commoditized, very process driven, probably with some red flags or some options to say, noting that there's probably a whole lot of other stuff that, could maybe mean that this is less relevant for you, or, you need further advice. But maybe in that starting point, we will see that coming pretty soon, probably sooner than we thought, given the news out of the UK today.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to stay with that thought about almost segmentation and specialization with respect to this question. And Laura, I want to come to you first on this one. All of you have kind of touched on this in one way or the other. But are we likely to see a lawyerless business model, I'm going to call it, emerge for different sizes of practice, different practice areas? So is it more likely to emerge if you're a solo or a boutique or a small? Are you more likely to see it in something like wills or traffic fines or debt collection, as we've already touched on? And will that become almost something different and a differentiating factor from those that have to remain lawyer-led? So I'm putting a slightly different spin on that when you're doing, the more complex stuff. So is there a divide? What does that look like, and kind of what's driving it in terms of just digging a bit deeper on this segmentation and specialization aspect of it, I guess?
Yeah, look, I think at the moment there already is a segmentation, and that segmentation is between regulated law firms and non-regulated, non-legal providers. And consumers don't know the difference. They just see a loan agreement that's spat out at the end. And it might be very similar to what the lawyer drafts as well, but the lawyer comes with those obligations to check that there's a conflict, and check that the client understands, and checks that the loan agreement is actually the solution for the problem that the client needs solving. And all of that's going into it, and all of this is on the lawyer's shoulders, and none of it is on the other business's shoulders. And then the client's going, well, why would I pay $800 when I can pay $80 for that outcome, which is not the same? And I think there's a real consumer law issue there. But in terms of going forward for law firms as to which will survive and which won't, I don't know, Terry, but I'm hedging my bets, and Nest's 5-year plan is on both. Yeah. So we're going deep into property law, which is my passion, and we've started up a consultancy advisory service to other law firms, helping them with the really tricky property law stuff. But we're also going broad. So we're doing legal health checks. So if you come in and you're like, tell me about your family, you're helping your kids into the property market, you think your son might, be in a bad relationship, and we're looking at people's situations across the breadth of different legal areas, because AI can't do that yet. AI can only answer if the right question is asked.
Laura, I want to ask you a follow-up question on that, because I find what you've just said fascinating about it's almost encouraged you. In some cases, I think it would have been forced people, but in your case, I know it's encouraged to be almost more holistic with your offering. And in that respect, I guess it's been a good thing. So where would you have gone? Do you think if the tech wasn't here, or it had developed at the pace that it has, that you would be where you are at this point in terms of expanding your business, or it wouldn't have mattered about the tech, you would have gone there anyway?
Oh, look, I think it's the tech and the cost of living pressures that are there, because people do see things like estate planning as an optional extra.
Yes.
But it's a really hard decision to make, because junior lawyers can't do those strategy sessions. You can only do those strategy sessions once you've been practicing for a number of years, and you can see the things the client isn't telling you. You can't give the junior lawyer a script or a flowchart and tell them go in and have these conversations. So it's a tricky thing to do. Similarly on the specialisation, it's a role for senior lawyers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're going to get into a little bit later, but hold that thought, because I think what you're also alluding to is a redefinition of a whole bunch of different stuff. So we will get there. We will get there, I promise. Dom, what are you thinking, or what are you seeing? Because obviously LawPath has chosen, in some respects, particular areas of practice to focus on. Do you see all of this kind of changing or being focused in terms of the size of practice or practice area? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what, especially with the developments recently, what we're seeing is that firms or legal providers are having to make a decision whether they go upmarket into high margin, low volume, complex work that's typically human led, or they come down market where they are doing low margin, high volume, and typically software led. And I think that being stuck in the middle is a difficult place to be right now, because you don't have the technical infrastructure to deliver the services at scale, but then you also don't have the expertise at the top end to provide the services with margin that makes sense. So we are seeing this kind of this divide between types of services. In terms of which way to go, really depends on your practice area, your kind of market, your customer, that type of thing. So, at our end of the market at SMB, we are really dealing with kind of highly commoditized tasks, general commercial tasks that lend themselves actually to more software-driven outcomes. Whereas the more boutique firms, maybe across litigation, family, those type of things, where it is more complex. And there is just a greater requirement for a human in the interactions with clients. It goes up. In terms of just generally how I'm seeing things happen as well, is that we, whereas maybe 50 years ago it was all human, and on the other end of the scale it's software, and we're kind of moving along this scale and moving towards more. We're probably only 20% along that scale right now, but I think as a commercial decision, a lot of firms are making this call, and the quicker you can pick which one where you want to go, up or down market, the better you'll be, because you'll be able to move quicker and really pick that. I think for us personally, what we, in the early days, we were trying to be all things for all people and trying to do it all. We have two entities. We have an incorporated legal practice that does our more complex stuff with humans, and we have a software business that does, software drafting with contracts. And at the beginning, we're trying to be all things for all people. And what we realized very quickly is you just can't, because when you choose which end of the scale you want to be at, actually the way you deliver those services and the way you need to run your business are really, really different.
Dom, I just want to pick up on the software question with you for a second, because I think what we're also seeing emerge is just around the software piece and the cost of it. So there's almost like another divide emerging in what can you afford in terms of the software actually to use in your business, and what can't you. And that's kind of, I think we're at the point where you have to have something that's not negotiable. But is that divide also emerging around the cost factor for all of this tech as well? Just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so at a high level, I break legal software into software that creates efficiencies for lawyers, and software that creates efficiencies for the end user, being the client. LawPath is in the latter, but if we just talk about the former, right now, there are situations where there's great software out there, legal drafting, legal review. We all know the brand names, and it is pretty expensive. But as with all software, the price will come down, the playing field will be leveled. And I do think eventually, just like in the accounting space, just like in the financial services space, there will just be a baseline pay amount that you pay every year to access software, and it will really level the playing ground for everyone. So I suppose right now we are seeing a little bit of like, oh, I can't afford that cool new shiny AI software, but I don't think that will be for very long.
Yeah. And I guess it is really just finally, I hope, pushing through this mindset of tech as an expense versus tech as an investment. It's just absolutely necessary in terms of you being able to do your work. So, yeah, thanks for that. Thanks.
Just if I can follow up with
Yeah, please, of course.
there's I've been speaking to a lot of people recently about how they're actually charging for their legal AI software, or legal software in general, but AI because it's everything right now. And you know, we used to do kind of all you can eat, kind of buy this software, you can use it however you much. Then we moved to kind of a seat-based model whereby, you know, you buy more seats as you grow. Now we're kind of moving into a phase of a usage-based model, and how we actually explain the usage. That might be API calls or responses from the LLMs. But I've seen a few people now, I think we may have even spoken about this before, Terry, where it's almost like a substitute cost. So it's saying a junior lawyer will cost you $80,000 a year. Here's some software that will replace that lawyer. It's $80,000 a year. So it's almost like a labor kind of alternative costing, which is, I think, really interesting.
Yeah. And I would just underscore there's a clear movement away now from just have you actually opened up the piece of whatever it might be versus how are you actually deploying it. We want to be able to measure and see how that's actually happening. So to me, that's a very positive change in this discussion as well. Miriam, you know, to you again as a wrap up on this question, how are you seeing this? Are you seeing kind of some sort of divide, or are you how is this coming together in the work that you're doing?
So unfortunately not yet, but it is something that we're really keen to push. I think that probably the law firms that we're dealing with at the moment are really getting their heads around using AI solutions out in the market for their own practices, but we're not actually seeing it flow down in terms of, as you mentioned there, Dom, like articulation of as to value to the client or alternatives to the client for ways different pieces of work can be done. So I think we're getting there, but I haven't seen it really occur much yet. In saying that, you know, it's front of mind for us, and we are going to start having those conversations with our providers about how they deliver work. We really want to encourage looking at different solutions and different options that are cost effective, while at the same time sort of understanding the risks and levels involved. So I think a lot of it's about providing options and having those upfront discussions and maybe a little bit of experimentation at the outset. I think that perhaps for some of the smaller, more agile law firms that are able to focus more on that commoditized work, it's perhaps easier to be able to articulate the business case and articulate the pricing and everything. But I think for those larger pieces of work like big transactions and disputes and corporate advice, that I think that, and I'm guessing here, but I think that it's probably really difficult with the traditional business models to work out how to price. I mean, I think that junior lawyer cost versus the software cost is, you know, an interesting starting point, but it's really tricky when, you know, you're time based all the time, you know, in terms of your business model. How do you do this without cannibalizing your business?
Yeah.
And how do you encourage long-term investment in these technologies that may take, you know, a couple of years for you to reap that benefit, you know, when you've got that type of model? Really interesting.
Yeah.
I wish I had the answer.
We're all working on the answer at the moment, I think.
Thanks.
Key takeaway from this, right?
Let me know when you find it.
But let me stay with you, Miriam, on the next question that I want to put to all of you as well. And we've touched on it, but drawing some of these threads together, which is this redefinition of legal work. And I think what has to go hand in hand with that is a redefinition of value. And in the value piece, I put the whole argument about the billable hour as well. So feel free to comment about that. But I wonder in that, and again, drawing on what you've all said, is the future less about lawyering and more about tech? Are we looking at a complete redefinition of legal roles? And I guess where are the humans actually adding the most irreplaceable value? So we've kind of picked a bunch of these threads together, but I just want to squarely get into this whole
Yeah.
redefinition piece. And as I say, Miriam, kick us off on this one.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about this from an in-house perspective, and I'm coming at this from an in-house perspective and a buyer of legal services. I think it'll definitely be more tech, but I don't think it will be less lawyering. I think the lawyering will be different.
Yeah.
But I also don't think that that's a trajectory that we're not already on. So, I mean, we've all heard of concepts of T-shaped lawyering and a T-shaped lawyer. I think that lawyers have had to alter their skill set over the last probably 50 years. We've had to become more comfortable and understand technology. We've had to understand things like how data works and is stored and transferred, you know, as part of the way that we practice. We've had to become really great at stakeholder management. As Laura alluded to, part of what we've had to do is kind of be a little bit like a psychologist and maybe pick up on where there are areas that we need to ask questions or, you know, delve into topics that haven't been brought up. We've got to understand the nuances of how people interact and think strategically about how we're going to get the best possible outcome. And those are all skills that don't sit within that technical legal practice. Now, it may be that this technology forces us on that trajectory or moves the trajectory slightly, you know, and that trajectory moves more quickly. But I think there's going to still be huge value in the lawyering. It's just maybe about trying to build out the skill sets that are required. So, you know, in our sphere, when we buy legal services, the technical ability is almost a given. The stuff that is really valued by the lawyers that I work with is, you know, being able to think creatively. So knowing what's maybe happened historically and being able to think about, okay, well, this is the way it usually goes. You know, is there something that's unique in this situation where we could maybe push against that? Really good communication skills, which, I mean, we were talking about this technology is developing that, you know, amazing communication skills, but, you know, being able to command a room, being able to deal with, you know, differing voices at the one time. Those are the sort of things that are really valued. So, I think that, you know, as a buyer of legal services, we're really looking towards our providers to be able to provide us with a full gamut of options. And absolutely, we want them to embrace this technology and to use it. But that's as part of a portfolio of services and skills that they deliver to us. As an in-house team, our skills are also going to have to change. We're going to have to get our heads around and being able to better compartmentalize or split the work that we want to do and think about the most appropriate avenues for that work to be undertaken.
Yeah, absolutely. No one will escape. That's the way I like to express this in this.
Yeah, and I think it's an opportunity for us to be able to really articulate why we're special and what's special about us and our value, you know, and really focus in on that area. I mean, you know, buyers of legal services get really annoyed paying for that heavy administrative work, the repetitious work. You know, that's not where the value is for us. You know, the value is for that, you know, unique, deep creativity, nuanced understanding.
Yeah.
And strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Laura, I know, given your response to earlier questions, that you folks have been thinking deeply about this. And, you know, we run a lot of round tables, and I have to say the only question where there has been absolute silence after it's been asked, where people really are trying to gather their thoughts, is around the question of value. What value do we add? And I guess it's almost like, what value do we add now in the face of this technology? So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what your thought process has been in your firm about redefining and value and things of that nature.
So I've really had to go back to basics and just been listening to what our clients are saying when they're coming in and how they're seeing the value in us. So we're seeing a lot of them bringing in online wills, online loan agreements that they've purchased saying, can you check this? And then we have to have that communication piece saying, there's no point in me checking this for the semicolons in it.
Yeah.
How about we have a strategy session to discuss, is this even the correct solution for you and what the framework of that agreement should be? And then, you know, it might be appropriate for you to go and key the data in yourself to a website and generate that. So it's they see the value in us as being that final check, but I think I see the value in us being at the front end, but also as the verifier at the end as well. And I think you know, the tech is getting so much better. I think the end piece, the verifier, will probably be the first to go. I've been working with Law Y over the last 6 months. I'm one of their verifiers, so I'm training the robots in property law. I think they had generalists to begin with, but then the robots got as good as the generalists. So they brought in specialists in each things. And like this robot, she's getting good. Like I'd give her a job. She misses the point, maybe 30% of the time. But even in the time I've been verifying, I've seen how much better she's got as a result of the training. But the piece that's the value is going to be in that first bit, the strategy, the how can we approach this? Are you asking the right question?
Yeah. But it's an interesting combination, Laura, because we often think about augmentation in terms of using tools and how you deliver the work. But you're speaking about it in a different way, which is how you're really delivering your services with a DIY, I'm going to call it that, aspect to it. And how you've then kind of changed your service offerings as well as combined that. So really, really interesting there, and thank you for that. Dom, how about you from your perspective? How are you seeing things shaping or reshaping, as the case may be, in this question of value?
Yeah, I mean, probably 2 points to make. The first one is the general question we've been battling with in the legal industry forever, which is value-based billing versus time-based billing. You know, until we change that, the incentives are the wrong way around. So time-based billing incentivized to take longer, and the client pays, whereas value-based billing, actually the firms are incentivized to do it as quickly as possible. Which is then when you start looking internally at your own processes and start thinking, okay, can I use software to speed this up? You know, we're not seeing the benefits flow through to the clients quite yet. I mean, we are, you know, people on this call, people that are kind of really trying to do it, but just generally we're seeing the price of lawyers go up, and the use of AI go up, which, you know, the math ain't interesting. We should be seeing it the inverse. But what that's showing me is that, you know, firms and lawyers are really starting to use the software internally, which is great. And then hopefully, like fingers crossed, we start seeing some of those benefits flow through. Probably just touching on the DIY side, and, you know, we come at it a little bit of a different angle. You know, when we started LawPath, we obviously, if every client could go and visit a lawyer, that would be my preference. But we know the data out there says about 80% in the small business space, in this case, they just can't afford a lawyer, and often they stick their head in the sand, and they just don't do anything. And so when we looked at that problem, you know, a solution there is that can we build some type of self-serve DIY solution that that at least gives them some protection. Now, I'm conscious that sometimes it can go wrong. You can give someone the tools to write their own will, they mess it up, and things go wrong. And I'm totally conscious of that, and we think about that every day at LawPath. But there are also those other, you know, 20,000 clients that got a template will and were able to write a will, and things went right. And so there's definitely a kind of consumer protection type or argument or discussion that gets made. What I'm really excited about, though, is that with AI, it's meaning we can make these DIY tools a lot better.
Yeah.
So for those people that can't enter the legal industry for, you know, cost or access reasons, there is a solution for them to go to get the protection they need. And so that's you know, what we're really focusing on right now, which is DIY tools that empower you to do it yourself with an AI layer on top that makes it better. And, you know, that in conjunction with lawyers using more AI tools, which hopefully bring the costs down, means that more people can actually go to lawyers. So it's all heading in the right direction. I just don't think it's linked quite yet.
Yeah. Dom, I want to stay with you for a sec on this notion, initiative, idea of access to justice and consumer protection and the AI. And I want to share with you something that was very sobering to me when I heard it, which is someone that works in the CLC sector. And I guess I was discussing with concern the fact that the tech isn't perfect. We've all spoken about that. And that, it is going to give results that are not accurate. And that we need to have some sort of consumer protection around that. And the response to that to me was, but if, and I'm talking about the 80% figure that you quoted here, Dom, if your choice is nothing or something, you will go for something, even if it's not perfect. And I guess the part about that, the protection part about that, is you won't know probably if it's wrong anyway, unless you're a lawyer. So I wonder, in this discussion, is there a way, can we kind of balance somehow the improving the access to justice issue, which is really woeful in this country as it is around the world, but somehow kind of balance that with the guardrails or the protection that we know that people need, because they are not lawyers necessarily when they're using this. And of course, I'm assuming for the moment, the other big piece to this, which is that they have access to technology in the first place, which, is an assumption we have to underscore. But is there a way that can actually be balanced? Because we need this technology to improve that situation. So Dom, wanted to start with you on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. It's a very challenging place right now. I work with a couple of CLCs. Everyone's grappling with this issue. I think they all agree, which is that something is better than nothing. But at the same time, we all hear of those situations where something that didn't go far enough wasn't enough. The solution that I think gets us at least close to a solution is, one, we need to be really, really clear about the solution that they're using, and that one is software and that another is a lawyer, because putting out there that, software is a lawyer is just not okay and not going to work. But then also, I think we can't expect everyone to, although we want to empower everyone to access the information, we can't expect everyone to just know when to use it. So it comes down to this guardrail idea, and it comes down to this, in commercial perspective, we kind of call it risk versus cost. I suppose in the access to justice, you'd call it access versus risk.
Yeah.
And that is, can we build these solutions and these models or workflows or whatever to maybe, as we triage problems or triage workflows, use the AI up to a certain point, but then as soon as we recognize, or the system recognizes, that the risk is getting too high, we need to refer off to a lawyer. So I know a lot of the CLCs do a really good job here, where general information, basic information can be done by one of their bots. But then as soon as they recognize that it's getting into an area where the risk is too high, that's when we refer off, and we end up with a hybrid model, which is still a much better solution, because what it means is 8 out of 10, they really were just coming for general information and they just needed a bit of a steer. And beforehand, all 10 of those would have had to go to a lawyer to be kind of scoped, and the lawyer would have had to spend a lot of time. And then the 2 that are really serious can move through into the proper process, which is actually, working with a lawyer. So I think it does come down to how we design and how we build the software to allow it to split. And internally at LawPath, we've tried to kind of create that model as well, which is, if you can always come to LawPath, you can always DIY, or you can always speak to a lawyer. We give you both options from the very beginning. You then choose which one path you want to go down, and if you've gone down a DIY path and it's starting to get complex, we recommend that you move over to a lawyer, which I think gives at least everyone the option of what they want to do, rather than saying, nope, it's $400 an hour, we're not going to do anything for you until you pay. So that's kind of my view, a long explanation.
But it is fundamentally also a different way of looking at this, Dom, isn't it? Because to my mind, what you're describing is a much more industry-wide collaborative approach, but also very fundamentally that it's client-centric. It's not about the lawyers, it's about the clients and basically what's going to work best for them. Is that a fair comment in terms of what you're saying, do you think?
Yes, I do. I think that I think empowering customers and clients with the options is really, really important. I do, though, believe that we have a role as lawyers. This is why I would prefer that lawyers build legal tech rather than non-lawyers, because I do believe as lawyers we have a responsibility to jump in there at the points where maybe a non-lawyer isn't well versed in what they're doing and say, not force, but say, hey, we think there might be another solution for you. Here are all the options for you. Now, like a lot of times what happens with us is that we offer them two options. They just say, I just can't afford it. I just don't have the money right now to go down that other path. So I'm just going to take the DIY path. But so I'm probably not answering your question definitively there because I'm kind of picking both. But we need to provide the options for everyone, but still guide them on where they need to go and flag when it's a high risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's a continuum almost more than a silo, which is, to my mind, got to be the way to go. But Laura, I know that you have thoughts on this, so please share them with us.
It's not a continuum, Terry. There is the lawyers who are held to this ridiculously high standard. We can't contract out of these requirements. We can't let them, the standard of written informed consent is so high that we're obliged to meet all these very onerous ethical requirements. And then there's this group that are offering the same thing and don't have to do any of it. They don't have to check that the will is actually being drafted for the right person and it's not being done by some opportunistic daughter. They don't need to check that mum's still got capacity. They don't need to check that mum owns the house as tenants in common rather than joint tenants. They can just send it off. And there's no other market like that where two different providers put forward what seems to be the same thing. And one of them has to meet all of these requirements and one of them does not. Maybe tobacco, maybe Australian tobacco and the tobacco that you get on the streets in Bali. But it's not risk-based at the moment. It's not consumer protection. Look, Dom's clients are probably more sophisticated than in that estate planning space. A business owner can generally, there's less issues of fraud, there's less issues of undue influence, there's less issues of capacity. They're running a business. They're probably a little bit better to give the correct inputs to LawPath than someone that's preparing estate planning documents or in that B2C space. I think the regulators just need to stop judging who's delivering the service and start judging based on the risks to the client.
Yeah. I want to get into that in just a second, but just if I can hold you in this thought for a moment, how do we reconcile this? Because we know that, the various chatbots are available to everybody at the very least, right? Even if they're not coming to a law path and questions are being asked. We know that too. We know that inappropriately a whole bunch of confidential information is being fed into that, potentially not just by clients but by lawyers, it would seem, as well, and others. And so we know it's there. We know that it's happening. We know that someone's going to do the old Dr. Google but now for law thing before they come to you using one of those chatbots. As we sit here today, is it reconcilable? Like what can we do to take the next step in trying to bring this together?
I think you can't have non-law firms holding themselves out as law firms, like approved by lawyers, designed by lawyers like this that you see on those sites. That has to go. You can't call, you're not allowed to call milk if it's not milk. It has to say almond milk or nut milk. So you can't have approved by lawyers or a lawyer's looked at this and gussy it up as a law firm. But I think it's also about maybe it's product warnings. I mean, AI does that already.
Yeah.
That concept of a lawyer stepping in and going, whoa, this is getting out of hand. That works in an environment like LawPath when there are lawyers in the ecosystem, but it doesn't otherwise. If the entire diagnostic process is done by tech or non-lawyers, no one's stepping in.
Yeah. So hold that thought.
Yeah.
I want to come to it in 2 seconds, but Miriam, just want to see what your thoughts are quickly, if I may, on this one, on the A to J one.
Well, I think it's interesting because I'm sort of thinking about, like, there's sort of 4 different manifestations of this, right? There's that it's non-lawyers providing a tool or something that they don't have all the ethical requirements and regulatory requirements to comply with. Then you have a law firm that has designed or a regulated legal provider that has designed and makes available a tool that assists, right? Or you go to a lawyer and the lawyer is using a tool they've developed internally to help them deliver the services, or you go to a lawyer and they don't use anything. So you've kind of got 4 different options here, 3 of which are probably fine, but it relies on, like, understanding what are the different pros and cons of this. Yes, maybe it's cheaper, but I'm not going to get that personalized bespoke look at it. It's going to be more general. And then, and that's maybe entirely appropriate depending on your budget and the risk involved in that particular situation. I still go back to all the time, something is better than nothing. And for me, I think there's huge value in being able to firstly get hold of the information, because I think that's a big barrier for a lot of people, is to actually know where to go and to digest that information and to be able to interrogate that information in a way that speaks to you, or in the language that you can understand. So I think there's, like, huge opportunity there, but I hadn't quite appreciated your perspective, Laura, before. I hadn't actually really thought about anything like that. So can I marinate on that?
Absolutely. Yes.
I'll think on that. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. And one of the things that I'm interested in is how a regulator would deal with the difference between a complete 100% self-help tool that's developed by a law firm, or not developed by a law firm per se, something that's just a generic tool that's available, and creating a legal document using that, as opposed to something that is also 100% self-help, but has been developed by a law firm with some legal expertise in the background, and how that would play out in the real world.
Yeah.
Can I add something to that, Miriam?
Can I respond after that?
Yes, absolutely, Dom.
From you.
Uh-oh. What about him?
If they let us create, like, if the regulators, the Legal Services Board, let law firms play a bit in this area, we're not allowed to play at all. If we don't meet those high standards in all instances, we're not allowed to think outside the box, which restricts us with costs, which restricts us with what tech we can use. And then you get to this situation where if there's 2 players in the market, the non-legal service providers and the law firms. Let the law firms play a bit. Let us contract out of the requirements.
Which is actually not helping the consumers in the long run.
No. If we let us act for both parties, without them going to get independent legal advice about whether that's okay in the first place. Let the daughter draft the will for mum, if that's going to be more helpful than trying to get mum out of the nursing home in to visit the lawyer. Let us play with the rules a bit more so we can use the tech to provide the services in a way that better suits the market.
And I think the difficulty is that you can't separate all of the interested parties and ask them to be operating in silos in this. I'm thinking particularly that we're well and truly overdue in Australia. It's happening obviously in other places in the world, the US and the UK, where we've got regulatory sandboxes. So it is a monitored, a managed way of experimentation. And obviously things are flowing out of that. But it seems to me that it's almost like everyone is being held away from each other and away from the opportunities themselves to be able to use them, that we need to kind of push through. Dom, I know that you had some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, start by saying we run a law firm and a non-law firm, so I see the different requirements are stark between the two. So I get the pain that Laura experiences. I think maybe when we look at what the customers and the clients are wanting, there is this huge pool. Like there is a problem with the access to justice, access to legal services, right, here and anywhere. And so they are looking for alternatives, and so they are pulling us actually away from being a traditional law firm and actually operating as one of these non-law firm providers, because that's where all of our growth comes from. That's where all of our demand comes from. And as we invest in more technology that becomes more global, these models aren't just Australian legal models, they're global legal models.
Yeah.
We're now competing with global providers that have completely different regulations. And to be honest, our biggest competitor right now is ChatGPT, and they don't care at all about the legal side of things. And so, almost like the same pain that Laura's having one level up, we're having at our level, but it's with the provider below us. And so I think, and I don't think that will change. There is always going to be people that are pulled, that are outside of the regulatory requirements, that are just doing what the customers want and demand. And so my view is that, the view we've taken is we are just following that demand, and creating a business model that complies at the different levels. So it is really challenging. I suppose the point I'm kind of making is that I think no matter who you are, it's not kind of all like, so to your point, Laura, it's not all like the greeniest grass are on the other side. Trust me, we're also dealing with all these other things. So it's challenging, but I do think we're going to need to be pulled in the direction of what the clients want rather than the regulatory confinements. Now, okay, not saying that we're outside of those at all, but just saying that we have to go towards what the clients are seeking.
Yeah. And I do think, by the way, Dom, that the folks that are working in what would have been alternative legal service providers, I'm going to call them business services and consultancies and broader now, I think their biggest competition is actually the tech. And you and I have discussed that if you're a law firm, that now puts you potentially 2 levels behind with that, because you've got the tech, you've got the other alternative legal service providers or mainstream service providers in that area, and you're a law firm. So it's really interesting. I know we've only got a few minutes left, but before we wrap up, I just wanted to follow this question around, guardrails and governance a little bit more. And it seems that what we've been talking about is kind of not just who should be regulated, but what should be regulated. They seem to be kind of quite a difference in mindset that one has to wrap around or combine. But I wanted to ask this question in particular, and if I may, of you, Laura, who should be building and enforcing the guardrails? So we've spoken about the regulators, but there's a whole bunch of other people here. There's the developers, there's the law firms, there's the consumers. So where does that responsibility lie? And I guess if we go back to that old regulatory sandbox model, it's probably ended up with the legal profession in some way, shape or form, creating that kind of collaborative discussion. Where should that lie? And assuming that it is a what and it is also a who.
Enough already with the lawyers. There's so much on our shoulders. We are wrapped over the knuckles for so many things.
Yeah.
I think it's not necessarily with the legal regulators, but it's things like the ACCC. It needs to be looked at as a consumer protection issue as opposed to a naughty lawyers issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dom, you've mentioned that from your point of view, and maybe it's because of the legal background and the law firm you also operate, you kind of have that responsibility to build in those guardrails yourselves. But not everyone's like you guys. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we can't allow these tech companies to self-govern because we've seen in other industries that just does not work. So look, I don't mind the UK approach where they've looked at the tasks to be done or jobs to be done and then split it down with different tiers of regulatory requirements. I think what they saw was the alternative legal providers coming heavily into that market, totally unregulated, and said, well, better that we regulate them and can kind of control it as a whole, but maybe to less of a standard. So the US have done something similar with Arizona, allowing non-lawyers to own law firms. So I think there's like definitely models out there around the world where we can come up with tiered solutions of regulatory governance, and so maybe something along those lines. But it is a huge task, especially where we stand at the moment in Australia, and it's not going to be a quick fix. And so in the meantime, we're going to, given that tech is moving so fast, we are going to have all these different players, both locally and internationally, coming in and just doing what they're doing as they see fit.
Yeah, it is a huge task, but, going to the point that you made earlier, Laura, we've also got to be able to experiment. We've got to be able to experiment because we know it's not perfect as well. Folks, tragically, I have to start wrapping us up. You know that I could speak with all of you for many, many more hours, but I wanted to get your thoughts and really do a bit of a round from all of you here and capture those as succinctly as possible. But as you reflect on the work that you do and our discussion today, we've covered a lot today, and thank you for that. Where do you sit in terms of this question, which is, will the Lawyerless law firm be a positive or a negative addition to the legal ecosystem? And Dom, I'm going to get you to kick us off on that one.
Sure. I believe that we will get to a 99% lawyerless law firm in some areas, and I do believe it will be a net benefit. We just have to do it the right way.
Yeah, thank you. Miriam? What do you
I absolutely believe it's a positive. And I think if we take the mindset that it's a negative, that's really spelling big trouble for us as an industry. We have to think of it as a positive. Yeah.
Laura, the last word is yours.
As long as it's regulated and as long as consumer protection is put at the heart of it. But I think to see lawyers as just mere document drafters, it discredits what we do. We build trust, we shape strategy, we are there for our clients in their biggest moments, and the tech can't do that just yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to wrap it up by saying thank you very much for an amazing discussion. And can I just say that I think what's critical is that we're having these discussions, that they're actually on the agenda for everyone, and that we're coming together and trying to work this out, because I don't think we can work it out in silos. I think we need that richness of approach and ideas and thoughts with respect to that. And all of you certainly have them. And again, I thank you very much for that today. Laura, Miriam, Don, as always, an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks, Terry.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.